So, and I'll let you sort of describe the scenario, but it just came out that the Division III championship committee is looking or has recommended this new selection criteria for tournaments, and it's not just soccer specific, if I understand it. It's for everybody, but the impacts of soccer obviously are pretty significant. Um, so maybe you could just give an overview of sort of what they're talking about, and then we could talk about the implications and all of that.
Yeah. I've probably spent way more time thinking about what's commonly referred to as pairwise or NPI as the other reference than I probably should. But I guess as a starting point, I would say um, this kind of got on my radar maybe in January when I stumbled across a YouTube video about what they're kind of considering. And I mean, I remember watching it and thinking like there's certainly merit to it, and it was interesting. And it just started me on this process of asking some questions. And then I saw some language come out after the NCAA convention that happened, where there was more discussion, and this ball clearly was rolling towards this being a real possibility to replace the current selection criteria with a computer algorithm. For those that don't know, our current selection criteria is for our team sports, and there's some variation here, but the basis of it is your regional advisory committees are looking at primary criteria, which includes win-loss percentage, strength of schedule, and results versus ranked opponents. They're ranking teams in the region, and then the national committees are taking those rankings and using them to select a national tournament. Um, and so this would replace all of that. And so anyhow, as somebody that was on the National Soccer Championship Committee, I chaired the committee twice. I'm kind of in a unique position where I've seen how this process works. I've been in the room when they've built brackets at the national office in Indianapolis, and there's many other coaches that have been on our national committee that also kind of understand some of this. But by and large, I would say uh, the process of what they're going towards, it hasn't been fully explained or shared, and so anyways, this selection criteria would be moving towards a computer algorithm that does what you might commonly see in Division I with RPI or something, where you are ranked one through however many schools participate in that sport. And so for team sports, this would apply to, yeah, obviously men's and women's soccer, lacrosse, field hockey, football, men's and women's basketball. I'm trying to think who else, softball, baseball, all the team sports. They would be using this same criteria. And as a starting place, Paul, I'm looking at it through the lens of I've been in the room. I understand how competitive it is to make the national tournament. There are 415-ish men's soccer programs, as an example. There's some that have dropped programs or have closed, unfortunately, but roughly around there. And when you take out the 41 automatic qualifiers, you're left with whatever the number is, 370 something. And we have to select, and the national committees have to select the most deserving teams out of that 370. And there was 22 at-large Pool C bids last year. So you got to be one of 22 out of 370 plus. So it's super competitive. And I'll be the first to admit, we as coaches would love to make sure that there is an unbiased, transparent and objective process for that to happen. And if there was a computer algorithm that did that, I think we'd all be for it, as long as it's rolled out in an appropriate way. I would say that the thing that we're struggling with, and I speak for a number of coaches, our coaches association, advisory council group that I'm a part of, and others. I think the biggest frustration that we have right now is that this hasn't felt like it's been done in a thorough due diligence, with thoughtful consideration, and most importantly, with broad feedback from the membership. As an example, I also am the Division III representative for our rules committee, which we just proposed a couple of rule changes related to timekeeping, substitution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When we have a rule change proposal, before we even consider it, there's a year or two worth of research and data that's done. We are surveying coaches, conference commissioners, officials, athletic directors. We are surveying them, gathering that feedback, making a recommendation, and then asking for feedback. And if it's a year like this year and the feedback comes back and it tells us we might need to tweak something, we consider it, we make a tweak, and then we open it up for even more feedback, which is what we're doing now. I've asked the championship committee specifically, will there be a comment period? All that stuff is called a comment period. And I've asked specifically, will there be a comment period for this change? And they have told me no. This is coming from the championship committee, which oversees all the sport championships. And then you can pull up the roster of who's on that committee. They're well-intended people. I don't mean to say that they're not, but there's very few coaches on that committee. And this is also coming from the NCAA championship staff liaisons, the people that are helping coordinate with the committees to kind of execute our championships. And again, it's all well intended, and I think what they want is consistency across the criteria that the different sports are using, there to be transparency, there to be objectivity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Among other things, the issue that I think many of us have is this is intended to create more transparency and objectivity. Having said that, it is an algorithm that nobody can compute. There's no way to understand the data. For example, a big part of this process is the way that teams' profiles are adjusted. So if you play a schedule of 18 games, your profile might only be looked at with a couple of games taken away. So perfect example, 2022, Catholic University makes the NCAA tournament. They're the last team selected into the tournament, and they make it over a team in their league, Drew University. Under pairwise, Drew would have been in the tournament, Catholic would not, which that's fine. It's at the end. It's the back end of the tournament. It's a coin flip almost at that point, which is fine. But when you could debate it, totally fine. When you pull up the pairwise data and you select both of those teams, there's a team in their league, Susquehanna, that each of them have played that did not count for that game. Got adjusted for Catholic, but not for Drew. Why that happens, all of us would love to know. We have no idea why one game counts for one team and not for the other. There's an algorithm that's selecting these things, and so I think there are some issues just with rollout. There's issues mostly with process. This is happening at lightning speed. without thorough due diligence. The NCAA Champs Committee will say, and they're not wrong, they have engaged the sport committees and asked for feedback, but that level of engagement is very limited. I know that this process was moving down the tracks prior to sport committees even getting data. The sport committees kept saying, "Show us the numbers." At least men's soccer did, and each time it was either limited data or they didn't get it in enough time. They've actually taken the access to the data away, so nobody can even see it, and that's unfortunate. I've spoken to a chair of a prominent sport committee, and he has told me verbatim that when they're providing a recommendation to their NCAA staff, that they haven't even dove into the numbers in any thorough way, but they just felt like they had to do it. So I think there's just some things that don't totally align. I mean, in the championship paperwork or in the report that they just recently released that I referenced on Twitter, and as a starting place, this is about awareness. I'm happy to see that my thread has gotten almost 80,000 views, and people need to know about it. In my most recent tweet where I posted the language directly from the championship committee, it even says that it's clear that there's more work to be done, but they feel like this should happen for fall 2024. And what I asked is, what is the benefit? They feel like there is a benefit. I would love to know what that is. And if there is a benefit, let's share it. And if there is data out there, which there is, share it so people know what we're getting ourselves into. So I think there's just a lot of issues here. Some of the narratives that are out there that you'll hear is, well, this is the same process that hockey uses, and it works really well. I mean, anybody can Google pairwise hockey and see that that's not universally true. There's a lot of people upset with the pairwise process in hockey, but most importantly, their algorithm's different than the algorithm that we'll use. So that's one. The other narrative that's out there is, well, we've looked at we've run the numbers. The teams that are getting into the tournament in the last few years in these different sports are virtually the same that have got in under pairwise, which for men's soccer, I can tell you specifically that's not the case. There's been anywhere from 3 to 5 teams over the last 3 years that would have been different. And one of those teams, as I referenced in my thread, is Washington and Lee, who made the NCAA tournament, which is interesting.
That's a shocking one, right? Like that's the one where you're like, wait, how did that happen? How would that happen under that?
Right, and I'll talk about that for sure. But the other one, and I can kind of pause here, is two things. One, if the teams that are getting in by their own admission are virtually the same teams using this algorithm, then they're in another way saying the process that we have now is working. And what I'm seeing is they're giving us something, and they're giving us an answer to a question that the membership hasn't even asked. And so that's interesting. The other thing I would say is, even if the teams were virtually identical that got into the tournament field, that's one small piece of the puzzle. The next question I would ask is, show me the bracket, because all those teams are ranked. It's a fully seeded bracket now, and I think bracketing is going to be incredibly affected by this, more than most people will know. So there's just a lot to it. I think transparency is really important. And there's a reason why a few years ago that the sport committees, men's soccer in particular, pushed for that final ranking on the last day of Selection Sunday to get released with data sheets. and people could look at it, just like people can look at the championship manual and figure out how do you calculate strength of schedule. Well, you follow the formula that they give you. It's not terribly complex.
Hmm.
You know the rules of engagement, and this changes that pretty dramatically. And I'll stop here. I would say we all want something transparent and objective, and we don't want bias. We just want something that works. This does not work in how it's constructed. I would love for this just to kind of slow down a little bit. Let's spend the next 12 months piloting it and tweaking it and have it reflect the best teams that get into the NCAA tournament. And I think that's what I would hope we all want.
Hmm. Yeah, almost like run it parallel, right? And just sort of
Mhm.
validate and tweak where necessary. All right, so a bunch of stuff. First of all, with your permission, I took your Twitter thread, and
Right.
I'm with this video. I will put it on d3soccer.fans as a post, so there it'll be it'll be there. So that outlines all of your points.
Right.
So there's that. The two questions I have, and you asked yourself the same question, was the first one is, what I don't understand what problem they're trying to solve, right? Like, what was the what?
Again, it's not that it's not well intended, and there could be some merit to it. I think what they want at a high level for the people that oversee championships is that they want relative consistency across the different sport committees. So, for example, if men's basketball, women's basketball, and soccer have the same criteria, which we essentially do, and the other sports do as well, they want that criteria to be applied in a similar manner by their different sport committees. The and I would submit that by and large that's happening. Maybe it's not in isolated cases, but I think those are things where that can be cleaned up. But I would say that's the issue that they would tell you. And and I would say what's again, which doesn't always align in some of the hypocrisy of what's happening. It wasn't but a couple years ago that they were very concerned about um, regional equity to the tournament, essentially, right? So like teams in the South and the West and these other places that can't get quality games or can't get ranked opponents or whatever it is. So we went from 8 to 10 um, commi- uh, regional committees, which it helped expand that a bit. Well, this gets away from that. And you could go as far as to say this probably wouldn't happen, but it could. This algorithm could spit out, the top teams from New England and what used to be the East region with New York or something, and you could have, let's say, all of the at-large selections coming from one or two regions. So that's just how it could be implemented. So I think that doesn't always align. Anyhow, I think there's some other things. I would also say if we talk about implementation, so the process piece, I think, I've covered a little bit, but the implementation of this and how this will actually look for us is interesting. I've been reading the boards as well that have been discussing this on D3 boards. I think there's a narrative out there that, oh, well, this will just reel in the NESCACs and the UAAs or whatever is out there. I don't think that'll actually happen. If you look at the data, those programs all play great schedules and they win a lot of games. And for the teams that play great schedules and win a lot of games, you're always going to be fine in this algorithm. I would say it's kind of that next tier that is going to be most affected. And where it gets most affected is teams that play a really balanced, rigorous schedule and may not have the same volume of wins of teams that don't schedule that rigorously, and those teams I see are benefited with this algorithm. Yeah, so we've just shifted really quickly from that being a big consideration of of access and regional access, to potentially this algorithm could spit out teams from one or two regions, and that makes up all of the Pool Cs. So, lastly, about access, the access piece we've addressed in Division Three. It's called our automatic qualifiers. So, really, the Pool Cs are, in my mind, should be going to the our best teams. It's the teams that there should be the highest standard of evaluation, and I think the implementation of this algorithm, the way it's currently constructed, isn't doing that. So I'll give you a couple of examples, which I think help paint the picture. Obviously, we've talked about Washington and Lee. So Washington and Lee, as a quick reminder for everybody, not only made our Final Four this year out of 415 plus programs, they played the 10th hardest schedule in the country, objectively the 10th. And not only did they do that, but they had 5 ranked results. They won 70% of their games. They weren't what I would consider like the sexiest resume. And had they been a little bit better in a couple of games, then they would have been the first, second, third team off the board. Fair enough. I don't think anybody would argue that maybe they're in kind of that next tier of teams to get into the tournament out of 22 Pool Cs. But for them not to be one of 22 Pool Cs would be absolutely unprecedented. Not to mention, we know that they did well. Not to mention, we have data around, which I'm going to dive into in my next rabbit hole I go down in the next week or so, of what teams do well in the tournament. We have historical data that can tell us that. Of what does that profile look like? Like, I would submit that profile looks like teams that win a lot of games, play a great schedule, and beat good teams. And the data can support that. And it can also support the teams that maybe aren't as successful in the tournament. And I would submit it's those teams that might win a lot of games but don't have the same rigor of challenge across their schedule. Those teams are getting in every year. It's our AQs predominantly. So anyways, a couple more examples. There's a team that would have been 22nd in the pairwise ranking, so they're comfortably in the tournament. This past year, I won't name who they are. 40% of their schedule, and again, you're ranked 1 through 400. 40% of their schedule was played against teams 250 plus. Their strength of schedule was a 542, which would have been among the lowest to make the NCAA tournament in recent years. Their best result, they had 2 quality draws. No significant result. I mean, not only are they not a bubble team, they're safely in the tournament. Another team played almost in the pairwise. Another team that would have made it under pairwise this year, they would have been 31st. 48% of their schedule was teams 200 plus. Their best win was number 62. They would have gotten in over Washington and Lee. They would have gotten in over John Carroll, who played a 547, a 609 SOS and a 547 with multiple ranked wins. John Carroll, as an example, had wins against number 28, 44, 76, draws against 34, 36, played a 574, won 70% of its games. They would have not gotten in over a team that played a 541, 40% of their schedule against 200 plus, and their best win coming against 62 with no other wins in the top 100 or results in the top 100. This goes on and on. Mount Union is one which I'll put out there because David's a good friend of mine. I know you're a Mount Union guy. I don't think anybody would argue Mount Union was a unique case this year. They had wins against Case. They had wins against Calvin. Their quality of wins were as good as anybody in the country. They would have been 11th in the country using pairwise. Now, if they get into the tournament, no problem. Fair enough. Them being 11 means that they're in comfortably, they're hosting, etc. And why are they 11? They played 20 games. 8 of their games have been removed from their profile. And the rationale is 8. So you're 40% of their schedule is removed. It's wiped away. And the rationale is, well, if you have to play a couple of teams in your league that have down years, as an example, that shouldn't overly punish you because they have a really bad year. Fair enough. I think we all get it. I would submit that those games still exist and it's a part of your rigor, and we should look at the total body of work. But philosophically, I can understand. But this applies for non-conference games as well. Their total strength of schedule was a 529, which again would have been among the lowest in the country. For context, John Carroll, Ohio Northern, and Otterbein, who all have to play some of the same teams in the OAC that just didn't have as good of a season, all played a 574, a 604, and a 562 SOS respectively. They went out of their way to try to challenge themselves, and not only is Mount Union in this specific example, and you could just wipe away Mount Union and replace the name of the team with somebody else. But that example is an example of a template moving forward where you're not penalized really at all. You're actually being rewarded by it. And maybe you could say, okay, this is an aberration, right? 2023 is an aberration. 2022, the team that would have been fifth overall in the country, their best win was number 38. They had no other win in the top 80. They played a 518 strength of schedule. It was a profile that isn't competitive in the country across any of the other profiles. And what you'll hear them say is, well, you can change the dials and you can make adjustments to your algorithm. It's in the championship stuff. The sport committee changed every dial they could. You could not move this team off fifth. So the changes that they make are so marginal. The algorithm is benefiting because they're removing bad matches. So 22, that's one. In 2021, zero top 50 wins for the team that was seventh in the country. Zero. Not one win in the top 50. They didn't have one ranked result or one ranked win. If you looked at the results versus ranked from that year, they played a 540. It goes on. 2021, the team that's number 9 in the country didn't play one team in the top 40. They played a 543 SOS across the board. Their best win was a number 72. So these aren't outliers. These are examples. And when you ask the NCAA staff, oh, this is an outlier, etc., I've tried to tell them, we will all be outliers. We are smart coaches. We will take the data and the algorithm and schedule to it. And I think the formula, and again, they've taken away access to the data. So I think it would be helpful to really dive into it to really formulate this better. But my initial impression is this. You will always need to play a handful of good games, whatever that is. For most leagues, you're going to have one or two or three built into your conference schedule, maybe more depending on the conference. You're going to want to have two or three in your non-conference. And what we've historically done is with that next grouping of games, you try to create a balanced, rigorous schedule with teams that do well. And I think there's less benefit for that. That next tier of games that you would generally schedule against teams that are 500 or above 500 or whatever that may look like, there's no benefit playing them because they're good teams. They could beat you on the day. You're better off playing a team that maybe isn't as competitive, and that game will be removed. And if you're going to play a midweek game, if it's me as an example, and we have to play a midweek Wednesday game before we play John Carroll on the weekend to get our 17, 18 games in, I will play a team that I think we have an opportunity to maybe play more guys, or it's not going to be as challenging as it would be against somebody else. So the practical implication of this is going to be significant.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like you said, right? Like, what did everybody start to focus in on when, well, this is, I mean, years ago, but was okay, strength of schedule matters. So, what you saw coaches amp up their strength of schedule as best they could. So, right, because that's the way another way to get into the tournament.
Right. Yeah,
You'll do the
and I would
same
say
thing,
this.
right? Like you'll be like, well, if strength of schedule doesn't matter, and you could conceivably have 8 games removed from your schedule for this ranking purpose. Criminy, like I would, like
I'll
you're
go a step
yeah,
further. The number one team in men's soccer in 2023, they played 20 games. Their profile was evaluated on 4 matches, so 80% of their schedule got wiped away. And and again, like they've told me in a broader way of like why that happens. Having said that, digging into the math, like nobody can tell me, nobody can make me understand or help me understand how that happens. The last two things I would say um, is this: um, the this is transformative. I would hope that we slow down a little bit, help people see what this is, get broad feedback from a number of different constituencies, and help coaches understand it. Because I think what we all want is a championship that has been reflective of what's been happening in the last number of years. And our championship has been tremendous. You can always quibble about, a team or two that maybe should get in or shouldn't get in.
all right.
That's fair.
Western Connecticut one year, Mount Union last year. I mean, you can make the debates, right? Like you could,
That
and
happens
that's
every year.
fine. Every year, you're going to have that. You're
Yeah.
going to have that
Now,
one or
but
two
the rules
teams.
of engagement have been set. I think we
Yeah.
follow it. I would also say when you're evaluating 400 teams, it's hard. This isn't
Mm-hmm.
easy work. But I'll flip it another way. And I've tried to make this analogy. In college, it seems like these college admission directors are getting applications from every kid that has a 3.8 and a 3.9 anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you evaluate that? You evaluate it by class rigor and what they do.
Mm-hmm.
This is the same process. If you're
Yeah.
up for selection, if you've had a good year, everybody's winning games,
Yeah.
every single one. Now, how do you evaluate that? You evaluate that by who
Yeah.
are they playing, who are they
Yeah.
beating, who are they getting results against,
Yeah.
and
Body of
and if,
work.
it's a lot of work. And
Yeah.
if there's an evaluation tool out there that can best help us do that, I think we would all like to see it. And I would personally, I'll gladly submit. I'll help them do it if they ever wanted to. Um, and I think there's well-intended people that are doing that work. The rollout and the execution and what we've been given, I think just misses the mark right now.
Yeah. I don't understand, and I'll just say this. I know you're on a time crunch. I just don't understand, quite frankly, how any legitimate ranking, excludes games that you played. I don't understand. I don't know.
Yeah,
Fundamentally, philosophically, again, I go back to you judge a team, and I try to do this with players' body of work. Like, I don't care. I don't necessarily care what happens game to game. I want to look at what did you do over the 20 game season or whatever the case may be, so I could get a better understanding of who you are. Did you improve? Did you not improve? That sort of record wise. I don't understand how removing teams makes that a better selection process. And in Mount Union's case, as much like if they removed 8 games, you might as well. That's almost the entire OAC. Like you're there's 9 team, one more team, and it's basically like you nullify the entire conference, right? Competitive.
no
I
doubt.
just don't
Yeah, it's
understand.
about body of work, and I would
Yeah,
love to see an instrument that does that and evaluates
yeah,
it.
yeah,
But I would love to see even more is a process that's inclusive,
yeah,
that has taken that has had thorough due diligence,
yeah,
that has taken careful consideration, and broadly is considerate of the membership.
yeah.